What was his job before he was Secretary of State?
He was like a backup dancer for MC Hammer, wasn't he?
No.
Racist.
Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff under President Clinton, and he was also National Security Advisor under President Reagan. Lyndon Johnson was basically the president who got America first involved in the Vietnam War, which
good for him.
the heroic President Nixon had to end. Peace with honor. And
the heroic President Nixon.
And Lyndon Johnson was also famous for being the architect of the Great Society, which is sort of the modern American welfare state. So Medicare and the war on poverty, which, as we all know, was a roaring success. Was he a conservative or was he a liberal?
Conservative.
No.
Liberal.
Yes. Well, he's actually part of the Labor Party, which is what they call the Liberal Party.
Not even an option that you gave me.
Well. And why was he important? He was important for two things.
Was he around during 9/11?
Yes, he was.
Okay.
Didn't have anything to do with it, despite your conspiracy websites that I'm sure you can read.
It was the Brits.
He was good buddies with George W. Bush, and
that's how I made the connection.
Yeah.
I didn't know they were buddies.
Yeah, they were very close. They're probably George W. Bush's best world leader friend. Tony Blair committed British troops to the Iraq War. And the fact that Tony Blair was on side with the Iraq War was considered a real big diplomatic coup for George W. Bush and helped legitimize the war and blah, 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 blah.
Well, it also lost him a lot of favor, correct?
It did. I mean, British people really hate Tony Blair because, conservatives always hated him because he was a left-winger, but now a lot of left-wing people blame him for getting Britain involved in the controversial war. I was actually going out on a date the other day with a British person, and he talked about how he can't even look at Tony Blair anymore because he sort of sees him as a sort of reptilian figure. And I feel like that is kind of a common sentiment. A lot of British people just look at Tony Blair and their skin crawls.
I remember seeing signs that said Tony Blair.
Oh, that's the high concept British political satire for you. He was the leader of the Labour Party, which used to be a real hardcore socialist party in England. And he was considered a very sort of middle of the road kind of guy, and so he was seen as bringing the British Labour Party back into sort of mainstream respectable opinion. Although now the British Labour Party is run by a crazy Marxist guy, so all of Tony Blair's hard work has been undone. So Robert Kennedy was the Attorney General of the United States under President Kennedy, so he appointed his brother.
That seems like nepotism.
It is, and in fact, after that, they passed very harsh anti-nepotism laws. Well, actually, first he was a senator from New York, then he was appointed Attorney General, and then when his brother was killed, and our old friend Lyndon Johnson became president and got America involved in the Vietnam War, Robert Kennedy ran for president against Johnson in the Democrat primary to the left, and so much so that President Johnson bowed down because he didn't want to contest the election. He was a sort of Bernie Sanders kind of type figure for his time. A lot of people felt that Robert Kennedy was going to end the war and that he was going to, make America great again and all of this kind of thing.
I should also preface this by saying I did French immersion, and not to blame that on anything.
I think that's fair to blame.
I spent a lot of time in school just trying to understand what was being said, never mind world history.
Brezhnev came to power after Khrushchev, who was booted out for sort of being too reformist-minded. Okay. And Brezhnev was in power for a very long time, from the sort of the 60s until the 80s, and when he died in office. And he was considered a real sort of hardliner. What's the third party in American politics? Republicans, Democrats, and...
I don't know.
It's a color.
Socialists. Green.
Yes, there we go. He won just enough votes to cost Al Gore the majority that he would need in a lot of states.
You son of a bitch, Ralph Nader.
Yeah.
It blew my mind about the Pauls for a long time because at a certain point, how do you keep up your political campaign? Do you think they genuinely think they stand a chance, or are they doing it just to get their message out there while they can?
Yeah, I think that's what the Paul family is all about. I think that's what Bernie Sanders is all about. Ross Perot, he was leading in the polls for a while, but he was just such an eccentric guy that he just kind of screwed his own campaign. And there was a part where he quit and then he came back, and by that part people thought he was unstable and not ready to lead. Francisco Franco was he was a sort of despotic guy. Some people sometimes consider him a fascist. I mean, probably in the 30s he was a fascist because there was this big Spanish Civil War that was kind of the cause célèbre for a lot of people, in which there was a fascist army, which was led by General Franco, and then there was a communist army that was supported by Stalin and all the rest of it. And ultimately Franco's people won, and then Franco became dictator for this very long period of time. And then when Franco died in 1976, the person that he chose to be his successor became the King of Spain, Juan Carlos I, who only stepped down as king quite recently. So the Spaniards, even though they became a democratic society after Franco left, were Franco's hand was still present.
They were under the spell
In a way, yeah. Some people would say that Franco was one of the great monsters of the 20th century, and other people would say that he was a dictator, but he was kind of a benign dictator because, Spain is not a basket case country in the way that some of these other places are. So
it's true.
Maybe in the grand scheme of things, he did more good than bad, although that's for the Spaniards to decide.
Theodore McCarthy.
Joe McCarthy.
I did know that. Okay, I did.
Of course, Joe McCarthy was the sort of crusading senator from Wisconsin who
right.
was convinced that there was elaborate communist conspiracies in all levels of the U.S. government, and he just went further and further and further in his paranoia until he eventually went too far. And he would have these hearings, and then he would, ask people if they were communists and
right.
where the communist conspiracy was, and
right.
blah, blah, blah. He was hunting all the time. His name was Barry Goldwater. He was Republican. He ran for president against Lyndon Johnson in 1964.
Okay.
And Goldwater, we remember him today because he was very right-wing, very hardcore conservative, opposed the Civil Rights Act and desegregation and all these kinds of things.
Major trendsetter.
Yes, major trendsetter. But the fact is that he led the Republican Party to the biggest landslide defeat that they ever had. Although a lot of people would say that Goldwater was later vindicated because once they ran a man who had been a big supporter of Goldwater, governor of California by the name of Ronald Reagan, he wound up getting elected president just a few years later. So,
but was part of his campaign distancing himself from Goldwater as they do?
No, I think that Ronald Reagan was always very unapologetic about that sort of thing. I don't think I was really out of line here. I think that these were reasonable.
No, I think you're right. There are a handful of them that I would like in the comments for people to post. I had no idea who that person was, and I'd never heard that name before.
Please do that. Post that in the comments and let us know how ignorant Adam is.